Hello and welcome to my video whereby considering 10 distinct types of analysis you can enrich your analysis of literature, be you in Key Stage 3, Year 7 or beyond. So you can't just watch this video once and really hope to understand what it's telling you. You need to return to it, take a small part and focus on improving your analysis a bit at a time. So, be you a student or be you a teacher, I've placed here 3 distinct ideas I want you to think about. The first is, how can we actually mark students' literature responses effectively? Or if you're the student, how can you respond to that marking? 2, what are these 10 distinct aspects or techniques or types of literature analysis that I have termed before? They are certainly not universal. People can think of different versions of the same things. And finally, how can we use specific combinations of those techniques to improve our literature analysis? So, let's start. So, the question we want to ask ourselves are, how can we improve the analysis of the students and how can we improve it in an efficient fashion? Especially because in the past, people can learn to analyse literature without the kind of framework that I was speaking about before. So, as we can see from here, we desire to teach skills of knowing a book, but we need to take into account that there are students who are taught by teachers who simply don't read the entirety of that text. And there are a substantial number also that, even though they do read, they really lack historical or cultural knowledge in capital. There's a lot of interesting thought about this. And finally, even if students are somewhat aware of historical or cultural capital, maybe it's been given to them by their parents or their experiences, they may not even have the vocabulary that allows them to analyse certain ideas and texts. So, in order to tackle those issues, I see teaching at the moment as trying to teach generic ways of approaching literary analysis. We give students acronyms, we give them numbers of quotations to find, amounts of paragraphs to write. And this certainly has an important place. But nothing replaces actually knowing the text, reading it more than once, working with it, thinking about how the ideas apply to you and your life as it stands right now. The kind of comments that we look to give are often generic, I find. And that kind of focus then leads us to consider connotations. And I'm going to talk about connotations later on in this video, but connotations can be understood in the way that they differ from denotations. On one hand, denotations relate to the dictionary definition of a word, so the physicality of it. So sun, the denotation of a sun in the sky will be that it's hot, it's a ball of gas. The connotations could be things like passion or life-giving. So I would say the first response to generic analysis of literary text is to focus on connotations of individual words. That is, of course, to look at them maybe even separate to the text itself. So like I just did with the word sun, you can analyze the connotations of sun in any text that includes that word. The benefits of this is that students do not need to really understand what the text is about. They can still offer a response in an exam condition if the text is going over their head. And certainly some exam boards are very utilitarian in the sense that the exams really are quite quick and they compress the upper and bottom end in the exam. Another benefit is that, well, especially for NQTs, it's easy to teach the idea of connotations, and actually some analysis of connotation, even if it is decontextualized and not really relating to the text, can be sophisticated, as you'll see later on in this video. So, how can we really look to improve literary analysis? Can those comments that we make or you read at the end of a piece of work really improve? Well, the first thing I'll say to you is that all the way through my education, my GCSEs, A-levels, degree, postgraduate study, the comments I often got were fairly small and almost universally very generic as well. So you have to improve from your own thinking, but there's still perhaps more to it than this. I see there being two distinct types of feedback that you can either give or receive in relation to the analysis of literature. One could be generic feedback, and that's based upon your style of analysis. So how do you actually approach the analysis that you have? The other type of feedback is one that is specific and focuses on ideas to that particular text. So let me give you an example. If you're analysing a question based on Romeo and Juliet, the Shakespeare play of course, and the feedback that you either receive or that a teacher gives is based around the way that you maybe weave a quotation, the way that you structure the depth of your analysis in terms of using signposts like moreover and furthermore, that is going to be generic style-based feedback. If, however, a teacher looks at, say, the quotation that we'll see in this video, that when Romeo kisses Juliet, he kisses her by the book, the teacher might talk about specific ideas of love and literature and writing and order and harmony, and those specific ideas relate to that text, Romeo and Juliet, and that particular moment. And I think you really need a bit of both in your feedback. The reason why you need a bit of both is because I think generic feedback is one that's prioritized just by the nature of how teaching is. If we are to give both types of feedback, it's important to notice that there are distinct methods of analysis that can be adopted. These 10 techniques I will show you in a few moments. We will do this with Romeo and Juliet, but first, here is the reading mat that I've been using for several years, since 2014. The shape of the squares I took from another resource on the wonderful resource, Teach It, provided by Nate. And essentially, as you can see, this placemat prioritizes the use of connotations and generic strategies towards the analysis of literature. It had success, it was useful, my students achieved very well with this, but it was flawed. I worked with a colleague who runs Spark in the Middle East, a teaching organization, to turn this into a flowchart, with the idea behind it being that students could refer to this flowchart once they completed their initial bit of analysis, and they can improve it with different types. In doing so, it prioritized connotations, and we created this word, single word, analysis glory, in order to adapt certain English vernacular. Its flaw, though, is that the mind doesn't really go along each of these techniques with the flowchart. So, for example, this context analysis and reader or audience analysis might combine together. So it's not very good, I think, to separate this into a flowchart. So it is with that in mind that we will now use these 10 types of analysis in a slightly different way to analyse a famous quote from Romeo and Juliet. The rough question that we're going to use is explore the different ways that love is presented in Romeo and Juliet's meeting in Act 1, Scene 5. And the wording of this quotation is not exact with exam boards, but essentially it's asking you to analyse how love is presented in the first meeting of Romeo and Juliet. So, to do this, we need some generic analysis. If you use PEE in other schools, you'll notice that we have the point here, then we have the evidence in the next sentence. In my school at this time, we have an acronym for PEE called SWEATY. And that starts off with the statement, and then we weave the evidence in, which I think is really useful. So our statement. Romeo and Juliet's first kiss highlights how their relationship is built on a mutual attraction. So the idea behind it is that their attraction is mutual, it connects together. Upon kissing, Juliet exclaims that Romeo kisses by the book. So to improve our analysis and to move deeper now, we need to recognize there's different combinations. So maybe you want to use the analysis of connotations, and we can use this perhaps with something with author purpose. Broadly speaking, you can use connotational analysis at the top here with all of these. And there are some more sophisticated combinations that we'll show you later on as well. Before I do this, I'd like to just refer you to each of these pictures. So the first type of analysis that I distinguished was connotational analysis. And we'll see this in a few moments on the next slide. The next type of analysis is looking distinctively at the kind of techniques used in that part of the text. The next two pieces of analysis are distinctive together. This is the analysis of themes, either the main theme, in this instance love, or maybe minor themes such as justice and destiny that could exist in the text. Notice that the main theme is a key, because the main theme or the question is the key to success, and the main theme should frame the rest of the ideas you have. Notice that the picture for the minor theme is a signpost, because there are very many minor themes that you could choose to use in a text. We also have this idea of finding a link, and the picture I've chosen for the link is a map. And the reason why I chose a map is because you need to know the entirety of that text to make a link between what you're analysing at the time and how it might link to something else in the text. I chose the term the denotational link because the link here needs to be something that really quite physically matches what you're looking at in the text. So an example could be that the quotation we have in this video is that Romeo kisses by the book, and we can link the image of the book to other examples of texts such as the letters and the invitations. That could be a denotational link. The sixth type of analysis is reader or audience reaction. And again, this is particularly important for plays, because when you watch something with a group of people, meaning is somewhat negotiated. You will talk about what you liked and what you disliked and why. The seventh type of analysis is author purpose. And usually this relates to a wider message that the author might want to give you about the human condition. Points 8 and 9 link closely together. Point 8 is about how you might contrast different interpretations, and this is especially key in Key Stage 5. And evaluative analysis comes after you have two contrasting pieces of analysis. So notice this kind of yin-yang image here, two sides to analysis, and notice how this picture here, so someone combining together these two pieces of analysis, like with two plugs. Evaluative analysis works in the space between two interpretations. as you can see in that picture. Then finally, and I think the most important piece of extended analysis, is sociohistoric or contextual analysis. And those two terms are entirely interchangeable. This means what kind of analysis is used for understanding the historical influences on that text. So let's move through now the initial techniques of analysis, taking on connotational analysis with technique space, major theme, minor theme, denotational links, audience or reader reaction. We've also got author purpose. We also have then contrast and evaluative analysis, and then lastly we have contextual analysis. So our first type of analysis is that of analysing connotations. And connotations are essentially any kind of association or emotion with words or phrases in the text. And as I said before, you don't necessarily need specific knowledge of the text, although that will make your analysis far better. Usually, the words that you want to focus on for this are ones that have unusual or unsettling connotations. So, in this instance, we have the image of the book, and some connotations to this could be order, harmony, authority, skill, experience, earnestness, which means to be keen, and also literary, canonical power, which again links to authority. And we could do this much more times. So, building upon then our initial analysis, if we're attempting some connotational analysis, we could say the image of the book evokes feelings of skill and earnestness, as if Romeo is experienced in love. And although this is still somewhat vague, it's still a useful form of analysis, particularly at Key Stage 3. So our next type of analysis is combining the connotational analysis with a technique. Connotations can be analysed then through three different types of technique. One are sonic techniques, such as alliteration or assonance or even repetition. And any of that means that we want to experience what the image is telling us. So if we experience, for example, the image of a book because there's some alliteration, the best book, then it's the skill of the kiss itself, the physicality that we're meant to be appreciating. If there are techniques that involve structure or repetition, then we're then going to make connections between that image and other images that are maybe represented as well. If we have metaphorical techniques, metaphor, simile, for example, then we're looking for more figurative comparisons, which kind of links to our idea about structure making connections as well. So what would this look like? Well, after our analysis, you could say the metaphorical comparison of the kiss to a book highlights how Juliet has idealized notions of how a kiss should be experienced. So the metaphorical comparison is one that is based in the mind rather than based in the body and in reality. Hence the words idealized and notions. The next type of analysis that we will look at relates to the main theme. You need to select connotations that might now match the main theme of the question. They might contrast the main theme or question as well. So, although their love is forbidden by their families, it is apparent that Juliet perceives their love as natural and perhaps written like destiny. So the connotations of writing as having authority, destiny is pre-written, are the connotations that link now to that main theme. Another type of analysis that you can do is to analyze connotations and minor theme. So these minor themes might exist elsewhere in the play too, and connotations might link to any theme, any minor theme that exists in the play. And there's about 100 or so generic minor themes that you could apply to almost any text. So, if we are to do this, perhaps Juliet associates Romeo's kissing with the authority of a book in order to rebel against the authority of her father. So we're taking this idea of authority as connoted by the book, and we're linking it to this minor theme of authority and rebellion that could occur elsewhere in the play. If we're taking connotations and the link, we need to look at how similar word choices and patterns of language occur elsewhere in the play. The truth be told, I think we would need to look at the fact that Romeo and Juliet speak in a sonnet form in order to really see how this pattern continues elsewhere in the play. The example here I've given is that this reference could remind the audience of the invitation that Romeo used to access the party. The kiss, like writing, flies out of the control of the giver once it happens, once it occurs, or once it is given. So we're trying to see the connotations of the quotation, the book. The connotations of book is that of writing, and we're finding other links to that image in the play as well. The next technique of analysis is to analyze connotation and reader or audience reaction. So the connotations here could evoke particular or special reactions in the reader or audience by being especially noticeable. Alternatively, they could be quite subtle, particularly in texts intended to be written and reread. The next type of analysis here is connotation and reader or audience reaction. So here I have put this unusual metaphor might encourage the audience to see Juliet as idealizing love through such an abstract and literary comparison. This would need a little bit more, though, to be precise about how the audience would respond. The audience might see her love as being naive, at least until she attempts to requite Romeo's love during the balcony scene. The next type of analysis we can see here is connotation and author, purpose, intention. So the connotations of that quotation could link to the wider allegorical purpose of the author. And this word allegorical is very important. And essentially it means like a wider message or like a wider purpose of the text. Our next type of analysis is connotation plus author purpose or intention. Here I have written, Shakespeare could be arguing that written depictions of love are especially potent and that they are the height of idealized romantic encounters. So one purpose of Shakespeare could be to say that it is our written and artistic appreciation of love that is as important as the experience of love itself. So our next type of analysis will link also to evaluative analysis. This is connotational analysis and contrast analysis. This really needs to be one of the most fundamental pieces of analysis that you use. And this is, in this instance, where contrasting connotations are analysed. The example I use is here. The metaphorical comparison of the kiss to a book causes the audience to consider how Juliet understands the power of the kiss. Alternatively, and that's your key signpost there to show that you're going to analyze contrast, you could also use words like however or on the other hand to make a signpost at the start of a sentence. This could also highlight how their passion is somewhat scripted from previous expectations and therefore not entirely authentic. Okay, so those are the important ideas we need. So this links to our 9th type of analysis. This is evaluative analysis. And this follows on from the contrast analysis. And essentially, like the pictures show you, it's when you have one idea, and then you have another idea, and then you attempt to combine those two ideas together, and you examine the space. Let me show you. So we have before the one idea, then we have the contrasting idea with alternatively, and then we kind of come to some conclusion. So to be clear, metaphorical comparison of the kiss to a book causes the audience to consider how Juliet understands the power of the kiss. Alternatively, this could also highlight how their passion is somewhat scripted from previous expectations and not entirely authentic. So therefore, their love is passionate. The speed of their affection seems unduly influenced by their past expectations. So here we could do with perhaps the conjunctive while. So therefore, while their love is passionate, the speed and depth of their affection seems unduly influenced by their past affections and expectations. Both those two words would go well together. Here now we have connotation and context. And this is really important, and I think this is going to help your analysis more than anything else to get to the highest grades. This particular combination might evoke what connotations and words are prized by that particular context. So here I have written this. The Elizabethans would especially prize order and harmony in love and marriage, which is perhaps why Juliet is attracted to such a metaphor. So it's knowing the idea that in comparison to Elizabethan times, we are less concerned with order and harmony, or perhaps we less experience it, that allow us to understand that the connotations of order and authority are the connotations that would be particularly important to Elizabethans. So now we've been through each of these different types of analysis, it's time for us to see some advanced combinations of analysis. And I really like this graphic I've chosen in the background here. This is the Konami code. And when I was very young and I played games, this would be the secret code that would work in almost all Konami games. Up, up, down, down, left, right, BA, start. And the reason why I've chosen this is because when you're aware of different combinations of analysis, you can really make your analysis sophisticated in a simple fashion, which is really important. And I've identified here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different types of combinations. Of course, like with all things, more exist. So the first combination is context and reader or audience reaction. So this is important to note. What would have been a particular reader or reaction at that time? And the example I've given is this. The audience would be delighted by the harmony and collaboration leading up to Romeo and Juliet's first kiss. You could talk a bit about the sonnet form there. And the reference to the book indicates a shared point of romantic expectation that will be pleasing to an Elizabethan audience. And it's this idea of shared points of expectation that enhance this analysis. You aren't just saying a piece of context like young boys will be enrolled to play the parts of women in Elizabethan plays. but you're actually saying something that connects with and enhances this analysis. Another combination that you could use is similar to before, but now you apply contrast analysis. And I use this in a separate video because I think this is so important. You compare the audiences of different contexts in order to demonstrate your understanding of each one. So, one example could be this. A contemporary audience would see a scripted moment of affection as awkward and perhaps even reprehensible. Because in 2017, as I make this video, the idea that you would want to script a moment of passion in your life would appear to be awkward and nerdish. A perhaps more enlightened reading would recognize the attraction of formality in courtship for the Elizabethans and could therefore see this kiss as actually meeting Juliet's expectations for romance. And again, notice this idea that rather than just saying alternatively, we relate to the original context by suggesting our reading is more enlightened, or a reader or an audience aware of the expectations of Elizabethan culture. This is a particularly useful way to analyze the context of Elizabethans and Victorians, because you can compare it to a contemporary context. A final point to make here is this. It's important to mention a contemporary context, because if we use the term modern audience, well, modern is a term that really begins to describe society in the West from like the 1600s, and it really comes to the fore in the 1940s. So if you really mean an audience that is now 2017 or similar, our current term is contemporary. Another combination is to think of how the question or the main theme would be seen in that particular context. So the example for this I have given is this. Although love would not be at the center of a marriage for Elizabethans, at least as far as others are concerned, affection and harmony would be ideal traits that would enrich and strengthen a marriage. So here we need to realize that whilst love in the entirely romantic sense may not be expected by Elizabethans, whilst, as we see with Capulet, a marriage is primarily about lineage and social connections, certainly affection and getting on with the person you are marrying and your mutual families together would be ideal and suitable and sought after. So knowing that context allows you to really understand that main theme or question. Taking this on now, we can then do the same combination but apply some contrast analysis. So how would you contrast, for example, the impression of love for Elizabethans with our contemporary impression of love? Here I've put down, although love will not be at the center of a marriage for Elizabethans, at least as far as others are concerned, affection and harmony would be ideal traits that would enrich and strengthen a marriage. A contemporary Western audience, however, and again I like to embed the signpost here, would almost entirely expect a marriage to be based upon romance and affection, and would entirely see this type of love as delightful or desirable. And it's interesting to point out to you now that the idea of marrying a stranger, as we kind of do now in Western society, we might meet people in courses or in bars or similar and expect that to become a relationship. That would really be quite alien to the Western audience prior to the 1900s. Another connection that's pleasing as well is to think of a denotational link and a minor theme. So rather than just seeing how the connotations link, can there be a more abstract thematic link throughout the play? So, here for example, you can point out that this literary metaphor refers us back to Romeo's original poems he penned prior to the play's beginning, perhaps demonstrating that the consideration of love makes us more affectionate and aware of its possibilities. So unlike before, where we analysed the connotations of letters and writing, later on, we're now looking at the idea of the creation of love letters makes us more aware and open to love itself. Okay, so now we've been through all 10 types of analysis, and now we've seen 5 distinct types of analysis combination. There are, of course, more advanced combinations of analysis that we could use. And you could really use these in any way that you wish. You can use 2 or 3 combinations and combine those themselves. So one example I've given is this: analyzing connotations, author purpose, no, not author purpose, reader or audience reaction, contrast analysis, and socio-historical analysis. And all I've done is combined previous bits of analysis that you've seen before. So let's have a look then. The metaphorical comparison of the kiss to a book causes the audience to consider how Juliet understands the power of a kiss. So the power of the kiss trying to be the connotations for book. A book offers power. Alternatively, so that's our contrast analysis, this could also highlight how their passion is somewhat scripted from previous expectations and therefore not entirely authentic. Although love would not be at the centre of a marriage for Elizabethans, so we can see here some context, at least as far as others are concerned, affection and harmony would be ideal traits that would enrich and strengthen a marriage. A contemporary Western audience, however, would almost entirely expect a marriage to be based upon romance and affection and would entirely see this love as delightful. The key thing here is that we're talking about the audience and their reaction to this moment. So as you can see, if you understand these different types of analysis, these different techniques, you can really enrich the style of your analysis. However, you need to know the text in order for this to be really suitable and sophisticated. So as I said before, you can choose the different types of analysis that you will combine. So now that you have made it through this 40-minute video, what should you remember? Well, first things first, you need to know the book. You need to know the ideas. Reading it, it's not enough. You need to think about it. You need to talk about it. You cannot succeed in any literature response unless you've thought about those ideas outside of the text. You need also to prioritize the analysis and the recognition of connotations of words. That's really quite helpful. But ultimately, it's your experimentation with the different combinations of those 10 types of analysis that is really important. And by experimenting with those different types of analysis, you can develop your voice and you can approach your exams and all types of literature analysis with due confidence.